thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be here. I love this series in general. I actually wish I could have attended the other two. I feel like there's a lot of rich information to be had in all of these. And I love the idea of us all coming together and thinking about the whole person. Like, how do we address all of these things? What things can we do from different perspectives to help you on your wellness journey here? So this one's focused on the psychological aspects. What are some approaches we can take to thinking about our mental health? And I wanted to actually give you some strategies to take away from this class as well. So I have some I'm actually going to teach you as well, some coping strategies and some things that you could practice on your own, but we'll try to do some of them in the session as well so you can get an idea what those are like. So introductions, we already did all of that, but I have a specialty in health psychology as well as neuropsychology. So I work both in the emotional sort of realm, but also cognitive. And a lot of these things have overlap. It's hard to, distinguish all these things with that whole person approach, right? So a lot of these sort of tips and tricks I'm going to give you can also help in terms of, having, enough reducing the stress and things to have, clearer thinking as well. So it's kind of a nice overlap to think about sort of all things going on sort of in that mental realm as well. Um, I heard from Naomi and the folks that you'd already gotten a little introduction to sort of the stress response, that fight or flight mechanism in a previous talk. So, sort of adding to that, I wanted to just discuss how that sort of starts to impact sort of the mental piece of things and how it can show up and how we can address it from the psychological side. But thinking about how this stress response, when we have that excessive stress from either external events or something's sudden that comes at you, or stressors over time, things that you're having to manage that might overwhelm your system in some way, overtax you. It usually activates this biological system that's lovely in theory in nature to help us stay protected, to keep us protected from threats around us. But oftentimes, these kinds of stressors we have in modern day society, our threat response system being on all the time is not as effective and actually can help contribute to some mental health systems if it's on all the time. Some symptoms that might be bothersome. So it's that sympathetic nervous system response. I believe Shannon got a little bit into this, but I wanted to just kind of reset a little bit. So that tends to have a lot of physiological reaction to it. So that experience you might have of anxiety or feeling nervous, where your heart maybe speeds up a little bit, you might have more shallow breathing. Those kinds of things are really because there's that physiological response that kicks in to try to help keep you safe at any time. So it's hard to see. Sorry, I tried to get it on one slide, but it gives you a little bit of an idea of all the different aspects of your health that this stress response can impact. So these thoughts, you might have these thoughts coming on faster and faster because of that stress response. And when you're having those negative thoughts, it might lead to more negative emotions also coming up and might also contribute to changing your behaviors, like maybe not engaging in self-care in that same way. So that stress response being activated, it can have a trickle down effect to other things. In addition to these sort of physiological things like muscle tension, and there might be increased sort of headaches or pain related to it. Um, Things like you don't digest as well when the stress response is on. So we want to get all these, stress systems turned off if we can, and get you in a really good place to be able to better manage the things that are going on because it's a lot all at once usually. I have this one up here because it just gives just a tiny glimpse into all the different things that can sort of show up that let you know that you've been overwhelmed, your system's overwhelmed, that stress response is on. It can, kind of thinking about it in terms of how is it impacting you mentally? Are your behaviors any different? What emotions are coming up for you? And also, is your body feeling it in some way? And I know a lot of folks I work with, a lot of the things on this list really resonate with them. So just I feel like, worrying, coming up with that can lead to, either indecision also where you might be putting some things off, or it sounds like too much to make a decision, or maybe you make a hasty decision, or you're more impulsive because you just need to get it over with. You can't handle it right now, or, behavior wise, that could contribute to, sleep issues. You might have sleep disruption, insomnia, maybe even sleeping more because it's too much and it's fatiguing to be up and awake and dealing with all these things. Or, emotion wise, some people will get into that place where they feel more depressed. They have, that lower mood that comes with feeling overwhelmed. They might even withdraw. There could be some apathy of like, I don't even care anymore. Like, I just can't even deal with it. So I just am going to get out of here. I can't even address it. There's a lot of irritability or sort of fussiness that can come up. I feel like that one resonates with a lot of people, where if you just feel sort of overwhelmed and kind of on all the time, having anything added to that can create that sort of irritability response. And then body wise, headaches can increase. You can kind of get that muscle tension, especially around the neck and the shoulder areas. Um, I've had a lot of people talk to me about their neurological symptoms also being more active or more noticeable when they're in the stressed state or when they're in a fatigued state. That's something that's a really big part of, for at least the people I've been working with, tends to be something that over time is something that needs to be managed, where you're learning to manage the mental fatigue that now sort of comes with this diagnosis and the different treatments you're going through and all the things that you're having to manage and that the healing your brain's having to do. That mental fatigue tends to be part of the package. I know there was a mention earlier of adding a nap to the day tended to help. That's a very common and I think really good way to look at it. How are you getting good rest to be able to balance out all the energy that it's taking to help you heal? So I just wanted to kind of give this little summary of all the different ways it could show up. So if you're seeing any of these kinds of things or other symptoms that aren't even here, it might be giving you some sort of little clue that you're overwhelmed, you're stressed, and that there might be some things we want to do to address that to get your sort of stress system turned off so that you're not having some of these symptoms. In terms of stress, what's interesting about it is we don't want to have none of it. There is an ideal amount of stress in order to feel productive and feel engaged, feel up for doing things. You want to have a little bit of energy that's coming from sort of a place that's motivating and that momentum building, but not so much and so much overwhelmed that you end up in a place where you feel burned out. Over here, we kind of think of it in a curve. It's kind of the way that we're thinking about it, kind of from one end to the other, can be like a little too little stress. You're maybe inactive. This might be where that apathy falls in, or you might even be depressed, have trouble getting out of bed. Where this area here is a little bit more the realm we want to get into, that optimum stress, a little bit of energy behind you, but you're not so overwhelmed that you can't engage in things in your life. But what we want to look at is, when are you starting to hit this exhausted phase? When you're getting overloaded, you have too much stress on board, and you're starting to feel exhausted. This is kind of that red flag zone of like, what's going on here? I want to make sure that I'm addressing it, maybe doing some of the coping strategies we talk about today before it gets to a point where you slide into this red zone. This red zone is really hard to get out of. It's uncomfortable. It's a lot of distress lies there, and it's something that you usually have to like get a lot of rest and other things to help pull you back out of, to get back into that optimum area. So we want to start thinking about, how do we make sure that we're staying in the yellow as much as we can, or if things are starting to overwhelm and come at us, things we don't have control over, how do we manage as best we can to keep from getting too far in the red? Are there red flags that are saying, hey, things are going too far, we might need to take some rest, we might need to do something to help address this before things get out of our hands and it becomes less manageable? So you kind of think about it on a curve. A lot of people I work with too, this is a nice sort of system, thinking about your family system. This is new for not only for, usually the person diagnosed, but for the people around you. It's hard sometimes for them to understand that you're processing things differently, that mental fatigue is a new thing, and that you might be experiencing stress quicker than you used to. Sort of the threshold for getting to an overwhelmed state after this diagnosis and these treatments just seems to be lower. It seems to be that people are able to get overwhelmed easier. That's just that's part of this diagnosis. So being able to kind of show people in your family or people around you, here's that stress curve and here's where I need to be, and giving some sort of like shortcuts to be able to say, "Ooh, I'm getting into the red." This helps to give some people language to be able to talk to people around them. I've noticed that this can help with that. So if that's something you're noticing in your family system or your support system also, this might be something to have a discussion around. Like, I want to, and for everyone, I want everyone to stay in the optimum stress zone. If everyone's, getting into the red at some point, let me know. We need to do some strategies. We need to do some breathing or something to get us back. So just feel like this graphic can help for a couple different reasons, but it kind of helps to express to others how how this might be challenging for you and how it might be impacting your symptoms and why it's so important for you to include these kinds of stress management, relaxation, kinds of coping strategies into your routine. So overall, coping with psychological distress, I mean, it can be a really normal part of this diagnosis. I mean, it can be a really traumatic experience. I mean, it comes out just suddenly. Usually you're not, it comes out of nowhere. It's a sudden change. Things happen really quickly. So that adjustment in itself can be really distressing. And then now you're having to live with this diagnosis. And how do you incorporate that into your reality? How do you sort of carry that with you now? A lot of people will experience, functional changes because of it. You might have changes neurologically. Your mobility or movement might be different. Cognition might be different. The work or other activities that you've enjoyed or that you've spent a lot of time and energy on before, you may have to approach in a different way, or you might have to, um, discontinue entirely. And that's a big change in your life and your quality of life. So a lot of the times when I'm working with folks, it's thinking about not only like decreasing the distress around adjusting to this diagnosis and sort of living with it and all the different pieces that it comes with moving forward, but also figuring out how to reintegrate into different activities that will bring them joy again, that will continue to really foster that good quality of life that we're wanting you to have, but might feel really overwhelming right now. And might be different. We might have to look at sort of different ways to think about how this might be a different way of doing something, but that is going to help get you to the same sort of goal. Um, I will say too that a lot of folks, even if it's not, the psychological distress, anxiety, depression, things like that, even if that's not on board, you know, pretty at a pretty consistent pace, a lot of people will have sort of like upticks in it. Like let's say, fluctuations going into your next MRI scan, for instance. You might notice that you get increased anxiety, or as it's been sort of coined, the scanxiety that comes up. And at those points, maybe knowing that, if you can plan ahead, you might know that you need maybe more rest and more support during that week. You might need to increase the amount of the coping strategies that you're using and kind of plan ahead to help you manage a little bit better during that time of increased distress. Something that I'm not gonna address as much here, but would be something if you feel like this is going on with you, might be good to think about doing more one-on-one type sessions, I mean, there's a sense of loss that comes with this diagnosis. There's a you had a view of what your life was gonna be like, what you were gonna be like, and this changes that, and there can be some loss and some grief that comes with that, not only in how it affects you, how it affects your future goals, your thoughts for yourself, for your family, for people around you. Um, and that can create some depressed mood. That's a little bit harder for me to address in this sort of broader, like class kind of context. But we absolutely work with this on the one-on-one basis. So if that is something you're experiencing and that's really getting in the way of your quality of life, I would say, reach out to your medical team and see if you might be able to get a referral to work with us one-on-one. Also, I do work with people too, where if it's to the point where the distress is super significant and it's really impacting people's functioning, we might even talk about getting some medication on board. The pairing of therapeutic approaches and psychotropic medication at times can be a really good fit. Because if you think about all the impact your brain has had, not only is it from sort of a neuroanatomical sort of structural basis, there might be, different connections are not being made in the same way because there's now a disruption, but also the way that your neurons, the cells in your brain communicate with each other through these neurotransmitters is different. And those neurotransmitters can objectively actually affect your mood. So even if you didn't have these stressors going on and other things are overwhelming, your brain might be processing how you experience things differently because of the way the brain chemistry is now. So you might be more susceptible to mood changes. Not everyone is, but it's something to consider. And sometimes adding a medication can help rebalance those, and you might feel better. Also, people, depending on where the sort of anatomical location of the tumor is, some people that impacts mood more than others, and you might have an underlying, under the surface, like brain-based changes that are making your mood harder to manage. That sort of filter or that management tool that your brain has for that has been disrupted. So there's a lot of different ways that mood can sort of be affected by this whole process. And so I just want to put that out there that if you're trying some of these coping strategies or you're doing some support groups or things, and you're still not noticing an improvement, some one-on-one treatment and maybe even talking to your medical doctor about medication might be an option for you. It's just something to think about. So there's a lot of different ways to think about coping strategies and ways to help manage the distress and the different things that can come with this diagnosis over time. A lot of them, it sounds like you guys covered in the previous session, so I don't want us to go over all of those. Like, good self-care, like you're doing all the things to help your body, your mind, your spirit be in a good place in terms of like exercise and nutrition. I'm going to touch a little bit on sleep today because I do have some tips around like sleep behaviors that might help with any sleep changes that you're having. So I'll touch a little bit on that because that is such an important part of mental health. But I just wanted to put in there that there's a lot of different things outside of this presentation that I'm doing that could be helpful. But I really wanted to narrow it down into things that you could really have as a takeaway from today to help with reducing that stress response for sort of that like acute disruption to your system of like, whoa, something is really overwhelming you. How do we get that back into a manageable range? And then I do have down here, if you do have an crisis, something like that, please make sure you're also reaching out to any emergency service or your medical team about that. These are really going to be more addressing, mild to moderate kinds of symptoms, not the severe type of things. That might be a different type of plan you want to create. So one strategy that we've already even accomplished today is thinking about a mindfulness practice. This is one of those things like exercise that just has, if you look at it, if you open the Pandora's box of research on it, there's so much research that backs up how helpful mindfulness is in so many ways, mental health being one of them. So, one of the things that how we conceptualize that is that if you're thinking, you get into a sort of a thinking space where there's negative thinking around feeling overwhelmed. What am I going to do? What's going to happen? Thinking about maybe the experiences you've had with the treatments and all that, and you're thinking about things that happened previously, or you're thinking about things upcoming. You're not really in the present. So sometimes that thinking of past or future, that's kind of where some of those mood symptoms can lie. So it's kind of that past is that what we call rumination. You're like thinking over and over again about something that was maybe painful or distressing, and you're keeping that with you. You're keeping it active by doing that. So it's creating a lot of distress. Future worrying, fretting about things, and also feeling that you don't have that kind of sense of control in that way too. Anxiety can really like feed itself in that feedback loop. So one way to sort of get out of those two spaces is practice being more present. I will say, I'm not expecting everyone to be present all the time. I've actually found when people are more present, sometimes it increases the anxiety overall if you do it forever and always. So I'm not that's not unrealistic expectation, but doing a practice where you actually allow time during the day to really focus and get present and be in the room instead of sort of in your head thinking about different things can really make a huge impact on your mental health. So the type of exercise we just did that Naomi led, those are great. There's also, I have in the resources list at the back a lot of guided practices that you can access online, or the apps like Headspace, Calm, that will help put you in that space and guide you to getting more present. But we'll talk about some of them here as well, different ways to do that. So it's really that intentional way of like being aware, that observation, like Naomi was mentioning, being aware of what's going on around you, non-judgmentally, aware of your body, your breath, your space around you, all the things, noticing what you're thinking, noticing, the feeling of like the air conditioning coming on in the room, whatever it is, being more present and noticing things in a non-judgmental way. So we want you also to, while being present, not necessarily get stuck in it. I do have some folks where if you're a little bit too present and you get really into what you're doing there could be the kind of a hyper focus on it. And that sticky quality of thinking or around behaviors or around emotions, that sticky quality can also lead to continued distress. So that's something to think about. All of these strategies we're wanting to use to help create flexibility in your management, being able to pull yourself out of a distressful state if needed, and be able to continue on with your day and have some flexibility in what you're sort of choosing to do and regaining some control in that way. But so being present without getting so fixated in the present at the same time. Um, so yeah, and it's intentionally, it's kind of taking you out of those automatic responses. We get into these sort of routines, and sometimes the routines need to be disrupted to try out some of these new things that you're learning, let's say. Trying the beetroot and blueberry juices, for instance, being more mindful of what you're putting into your body, for instance. So one of these, let's make sure. So yeah, one of these strategies that's really helpful in terms of a more mindful approach to coping is grounding. The reason I love this strategy, and it comes out of more of the trauma literature, is that it's a way to be present without you don't always have to be focusing on you. A lot of the mindfulness practices, and we'll do one of them today where you're focusing on your own breath, your body. You might do a body scan, for instance, where you're checking in. These are all lovely, by the way. I don't have time to go through all of them, but a body scan where you're checking in on how you feel in different parts, you're letting go of those. Those can also be really lovely in helping heal your relationship with your body because that can be disrupted when you have these kinds of medical or health conditions. But I like the grounding one because even if you're not in a good place with your body, you can still do this one. Because a lot of times you're focusing outwardly. Grounding in terms of being a coping strategy for that traumatic response and like really heightened stress wants you to focus outward. So you're not focusing on your thinking, you're not focusing on the headache you have, you're not focusing on these other things that might be creating distress. So it's a way to get your attention outward. So you're shifting into the present by kind of getting into the room, let's say. One thing to keep in mind, we'll do some of these. One thing to keep in mind is you want it to be neutral. Like, I don't want you to focus on something in the room that brings up like really, emotional memories for you or that has this kind of meaning behind it. I want it to be the most boring thing you can find to focus on, looking around and finding, the box that your glasses came in at one point. Something that has a completely neutral, no emotional reaction kind of response. That's the kind of stuff we want you to be looking at because we want this to be an activity that's not adding to your emotional response in those moments. And grounding, while it's good to have these practices for just practicing them during the day so that they're like in your toolbox ready to go, you can practice them leading up to these sort of heightened emotional response moments like going in for your scan. These tend to be the most helpful after you practice them when like there's a steep increase in feeling distress, like the heightened moments maybe around your scan or other stressors that come up in your life where it feels like it kind of came out of nowhere. If your system's getting overwhelmed again, this is a good way to sort of turn off that system, give you a timeout by getting your attention out of you, out of your thinking, out of the experience that you're going through, giving you a break. It gives you a little break to be able to allow yourself to calm down. So that idea of it being something neutral, that's why we want it to be kind of neutral. We're giving you a break from everything that's kind of going on and letting your body and your stress system settle. So here's some examples of that. And we'll do one on the next page so we can try it together. But like I mentioned with the looking at a box, describing your environment in detail. And this can be, what's lovely about all these, you can do them internally and say them in your head. Or if you're at home alone, you can say them out loud even better. So then you're like really getting into the room because you're using your voice, you're hearing yourself say something, you're kind of tapping into those sensory pieces. And anything that's using senses is going to get you into the room more because your senses live here. So anything where you're having to, experience a feeling of something, a smell, a touch, a taste, hearing something, any of that's going to help get you more into the room and out of your head. But describing your environment in detail, so I'll have people, say like, tell me everything you can see in front of you in detail. Oh, I see a bookcase. It has, I can see that has some 4 different shelves. There's yellow and green books on this one. Describe it in detail. Again, getting your attention out, and again, neutral. I don't have any attachment to that bookcase. Or it can be one of the ones I love and that the folks I work with have really taken to because it's so easy to do. Usually you can pull it out pretty quickly, is picking a color and looking and finding everything in the room that is that color. So you're like, okay, let me look. What is everything in here that's blue? Okay, the wall is blue, that bag is blue, my cup is blue. Anything like that where you're like attending to external sources and has neutral, completely pointless activity. That's what we're going for with the grounding. Other things you can do in terms of sensory kinds of things is like running cold water under your hands. It kind of, again, helps to like that feeling, the sensation will kind of bring you back into the present, get you out of your head and into that sensation. Some folks I know will even bring like an ice pack with them to their appointments for their neuro-oncology appointments. So if they're starting to get overwhelmed, they can kind of reach in and grab that cold and kind of pulls them back out of it. Digging your heels into the floor, like really feeling, literally grounding yourself, feeling your feet on the floor, wiggling your toes around so that you're getting that feeling of being grounded. Clenching your fists and releasing them. Some people really like that one. These are all things that you can do sort of like sneakily too. People aren't really noticing that you're grounding your feet. So you can be doing it while you're in the waiting room or while you're, out and about. If you're on BART somewhere, you can be looking at all the different colors on BART that you can find that are blue. That person's wearing a blue shirt. Over there's a blue backpack. Rubbing your fingertips together. This one kind of came out of a body scan that I really like that I'm not going to have time to do today, unfortunately, but the body scan I really do think is a helpful strategy. But rubbing your fingertips together is another one. You could be doing, your hands could be in your pockets and you're kind of rubbing them, noticing the feeling of your fingertips, something else that will bring your attention outside and sort of noticing feeling instead of your thinking. And so these are kind of some of the go-tos that folks have said that they use that are kind of more easily accessible than some others I have on a list. So I'm using also, I should say too, I'm using everything I'm presenting today are things that I've worked with folks on, and the feedback I've gotten is good on all of these things. So I wanted to bring to you really the things that people are saying are working, right? We have lots of options. We only have an hour here. So the things that I wanted to, bring to you here are things that people are telling me over and over again can be really, really helpful. These are the grounding ones people tend to go to most. So I highly recommend those. One of the ones that I know Naomi will use in her group too, it's kind of a classic. You'll see it online even. I think they'll do it even when like in schools and things to teach kids grounding, is the 5-4-3-2-1 grounding. It's a nice kind of, catchy way to think about it. So the 5 is naming, kind of like we did with the colors, naming 5 things you can see. So looking around the room, and I want you to try this with me as we're doing it. Look around the room where you're at right now and name those things in your head. What can you see? We're using that sensory experience. What can you hear? Take a second and listen. Are you noticing anything? Can you hear like the roaring of maybe your air conditioning or the refrigerator in the other room? Is there someone collecting trash outside? For me, it might be sometimes like, is my cat meowing in the other room? Something like that. What do you hear right now? Um, Try to find 4 of those things. And maybe there's no noise. Maybe that's the experience. I'm listening and there is not a lot of noise to hear right now. 3 things you can touch around you, and if you're out in public somewhere, it could be I'm touching my pant leg, I'm touching my bag I have with me, I'm touching my glasses. 3 things you can touch, getting your attention onto those things, noticing those things, using that mindfulness of being aware and observing. I'm touching this, what does that feel like? I'm touching my pant leg, what does that feel like? That's going to help get your attention onto those things and out of the emotional distress you're experiencing. 2 things you can smell, pros and cons of this in a place like BART, but like in your, other circumstances, maybe it smells like cookies someone's making in the other room. Pros and cons of the smell one, but what can you smell right now? Or maybe there's a lack of a smell. Maybe you can smell the lotion you put on earlier. And then this one, this one again might be hard depending on where you're at, but something you can taste. Maybe it's just the water that you have next to you that you're drinking, because everyone's getting in their, 50 ounces or more of water, it sounds like, per day. Getting that water, and maybe you're tasting the water, maybe you're tasting the coffee you had earlier, the tea, something you can taste. So it's really tapping into those different sensory sort of experiences. This is a good takeaway one to practice. I had the other list on the previous slide. You can try some of those out and see which ones work best for you. Everyone's different. Everyone's going to take something different away from this. And that's why I present so many options. I want you to have things to choose from. It's like I present a buffet and you can decide if today you want the roast beef and the frozen yogurt at the end, or if you're going salad this time, maybe you want that, what's the ambrosia one with like the little like marshmallows, is that ambrosia? Yeah, different. It just depends on what kind of speaks to you and what works best with like how you can incorporate it into your day-to-day life. Okay, so that was grounding. That was that mindfulness practice. That's being able to get your attention up and out of your experience to give you a break, let your system settle down if you're getting overwhelmed, right? The other one, and we'll go with how Mary pointed out that hack is an in word, right? A way to hack your stress response is deep breathing. Breathing is something I think a lot of folks have been introduced to at some point. You've taken yoga. They might have even talked about it in the previous classes you guys took. that breathing overall is just a great thing to do. Doing those deep breaths are going to help sort of relax your system. That's a good way to cope with feeling overwhelmed. There is a particular way of doing deep breathing that's an even more effective hack. And so I wanted to point that one out in case you haven't been introduced to it. So there's a type of breathing called diaphragmatic breathing, and that's engaging your diaphragm as you breathe in order to get the best and most open experience of breathing to be able to push out the most breath also. So I have kind of a graphic here. I couldn't find a fantastic graphic, but this is pretty good. So it's thinking about how your abdomen, let me see if I can kind of point this out. If you can see in that first one, your abdomen, when you're breathing in, we want you to be breathing into your belly. That relaxed breath kind of lives in the belly, opening your airway through your diaphragm, which is going to pull down into your stomach area through your abdomen, that belly breath. Anxiety breathing, it lives up here. So if you're noticing, I've got these short little breaths. If my shoulders are going up and down as I breathe, if I'm doing this as I breathe, that's the anxious breath. We want to try to move it down into the belly and get that diaphragm to open, and that's going to pull it out of anxious breath zone. This hacks the system in that if your body tells your brain, I'm slowly relaxed breathing right now, I'm very chill, it'll shut off the system because your brain goes, oh, turns out we're not in danger. We're breathing so comfortably, it must be fine. So we want our body to then tell our brain, it's okay, stop sending all these stress hormones. I'm okay right now. So if you do this deep breathing, even if you're in that stress state, it should calm down that system and you should be able to feel better overall. So I wanted to do this one together so you can kind of experience it. So just, on your own, back wherever you are, settle into your chair or wherever you're sitting or standing. Put one of your hands on your belly, so like your belly button area, so you can really feel what's moving, and then one hand on the chest up here. And I want you to just kind of sit with it for a minute and notice where you're breathing naturally. Like, where is the breath going? What are you noticing is moving? Are you noticing it's shallow? Is it deep? What are you noticing about it? Just sort of tune into it and notice where you're at now. And if you're doing a lot of breath into the chest, again, it's kind of like the mindfulness and being present. It's not expected for you to be in a deep, relaxed breath all the time. That actually is probably too much lovely oxygen for us. That's not our natural state, but we want to shift it and give your body an opportunity to get into that deep diaphragmatic breathing to help you feel more relaxed. So if you're in the anxiety sort of chest breathing right now, totally fine. That's normal, but we want to shift it to help you relax. So as you're noticing sort of when you breathe, try to sort of focus your attention now on pushing whatever hand is on your belly, getting that pushed out and getting that hand to move, and try to keep the hand that's on your chest more still. Just kind of shift it and notice where it's going. Get it pulled down there. What I want you to do that too is if you activate the diaphragm, what you're doing when you push your belly out like that, if you think about breathing down, that tends to help. So think about you're opening your lungs down instead of out. By doing that, it's sort of inherently, if you push your belly out, it sort of pulls down. And that feels a little different. There's like a little muscle sort of under your rib cage that you can feel activate as you're pulling your stomach out, allowing that sort of balloon of air to fill, and it's going to pull that space that you need to take a really deep breath. It's going to pull it open. That's the breath we're going for. We want it to be open, and then we want to be able to push with that same belly, push it out. So you're opening and sort of closing that breath using that diaphragm. By engaging that, you're tapping into the parasympathetic nervous system, which I think I heard again that Shannon introduced a little bit in the first one. That's the off switch to the stress response. So we always want that one to be more active. We want to turn on the parasympathetic to help us rest and digest, is what it's called. You're more relaxed. Things like your digestion turn back on. So you should just generally feel better. It actually, helps to improve that stress response we went over at the beginning. All those things that come with it, we want those shut down. This taps into it, that using that diaphragm, it engages this vagus nerve and does all this stuff. So we want to activate that if we can during this deep breathing. It doesn't have to be this way all the time. You can just do some, breaths here and there throughout the day. Any kind of deep breath is helpful. But this one, if you're like, I'm going to sit down and do some breathing, I'm going to get really into it. I'm going to really activate that parasympathetic so I'm more relaxed. This one's a really good one to practice by activating that diaphragm. So I want us to just do, I'm going to have us practice it together so you can get a feel for it. I'm going to have us do counts and try to breathe into that belly breath using your diaphragm, slowing the whole breathing process down. Again, that's that hack of telling your brain, I must not be in danger because I'm breathing so slowly. I'm like a cat laying out in the sunshine. I'm super chill right now. That's what we want to tell your brain. So slow, longer counts. The typical one we start with is like counts of four in, pausing for about four, counts of four out. That pause, if it's if it creates stress, like you feel like you're holding your breath and you're like, oh, this is making me anxious, don't do four. Let's move on. We don't want to create more stress with this. But the pause, again, is that way of telling your brain, I'm so relaxed, I don't even need a deep breath right now. That's how cool I am. So that pause helps to continue to give that message of slowing things down. So we're going to do four in, pause for four if you can, or not. I'll walk us through four, but if you can't, that's okay. And then out for four, and then in for four, and then we're going to go around a few times just to get a feel for it. Okay. So I'm gonna say I'll do it with you. Okay. So I've got one hand on the chest, one hand on the belly. So I'm gonna go ahead and count us in. So go ahead and breathe in for four. So breathe in, two, three, four. Hold one, two, three, four. Out one, two, three, four. Hold one, two, three, four. In one, two, three, four. Hold one, two, three, four. Out one, two, three, four. Hold one, two, three, four. In one, two, three, four. Hold one, two, three, four. Out one, two, three, four. Hold one, two, three, four. Okay, so that's just a little sample of that and how that feels. Now tune into yourself a little bit. Do you notice any difference? Does anything feel more relaxed? Does it not? Was that hard for you to do? Did it feel uncomfortable? Did it feel great? Could you have held for longer? Did you want a longer in breath and a longer out breath? You can play around with it. Four is kind of the average people tend to be able to tolerate, especially at first. As you practice it more, you could extend the out breath, for instance. There's some research behind the out breath being particularly effective. It's really getting rid of that CO2 that can create a stress response. So there's things you can play around with and what's comfortable for you, but we want to engage that sort of diaphragm and really allow for that good open breath into that belly. That's going to be the way to really hack that system. So this slide too kind of goes through that exercise we just did. The suggestion is to, practice it daily. Any of these coping strategies, if you want to be able to use them in the moment you need them, it needs to be practiced ahead of time or you're not going to think of it. When you're in that stressed state, we're not thinking as clearly. We literally shut our frontal lobes down. So we're not using our good, rational reasoning in those moments. So we need to be something that's like ingrained. So if it's something ingrained, you're going to go to it, something really routine. So if you can start to do this as a practice, mindfulness practice, the body scan, deep breathing, grounding, practicing those daily, you're much more likely in those moments where you really need something to think of it. Okay. So this kind of shows you how to do it in your daily practice, trying it at least once per day, maybe aiming to do 2 to 3 times a day if you can manage, maybe 3 to 5 minutes at first, building up if you can over time. And really just noticing, tuning into, is this helpful? Is it not? What am I noticing about it? Some people tuning into their breath may create more anxiety, especially if your relationship with your body is a little bit challenging right now. If that's going on for you, focus on those grounding exercises instead. Get that focus out and into the room. But if you can focus on the breath and that's not creating more anxiety, then this is a lovely thing to add to your relaxation practice. It's going to really help with that stress management. Okay. So those are two of the skills I wanted you to be able to walk away with. Like make sure that you have those in your toolbox that you can practice and pull them out as needed that are good to get you out of that sort of heightened stress into a more calm space where if you're in that more calm space, you can then think of other things to help you. You can think of, calling a friend or going for a walk or some of those other things that might feel unreachable when you're so overwhelmed. It kind of gets you out of that place. So once you're sort of out of that place and you're feeling like, okay, I want to start some other approaches to how I can feel better over time, let's say. One of the things I work with a lot of folks on is thinking about what are your values right now? This is a way to sort of redirect some of that negative thinking and the negative experiences you have into thinking about more positive things. What is it that's important to me? What do I want to make sure that I'm spending my time and energy on? One of the things about this diagnosis is that in no other way, and other people don't understand it in the way you do, could focus your attention on everyone only has so much time and everyone only has so much energy. What do I want to do with mine? This is a good exercise to do to figure out where do I want to put that time and energy because it's really precious and I want to be able to do it in line with my values and what's important. So examining that can be really helpful in just kind of reorienting you, especially after something has sort of, rocked your world like this, that has shaken you, might have changed the way you're interacting with your world. You might not be going to work in the same way. You might not be engaging in some of these activities in the way you used to. What do you want to do now? Now that we're at a place where we can look at them, what do you want to do with your time and energy? So this can be really helpful in enhancing those positive feelings, especially if you're starting to feel a sense of like not being able to feel productive or purposeful, if you need to foster a sense of accomplishment in some way and satisfaction. Some of the I hear from people over and over again, those are some of the things that get lost, especially as some of these activities become less achievable that you were doing before because of the diagnosis, like full-time work, for instance. A lot of people, if you're pulling away from that, how do I still get that sense of meaning and purpose in my life that I was getting from contributing in this way? There's lots of other ways to do it, but it's thinking about what approach do I need to take now and how do I have that align with what's important to me? So thinking about what your values are can kind of help you make some of those decisions. Um, I do want to say too, this is we use it as sort of like value driven goals to then start to get a little forward thinking of what I want to do with it, have that action. Some people respond really well to having an action, something you can control, something you can do when a lot of these things are sort of out of your control at different points in your disease trajectory. You're kind of reliant on others and your treatments. Some of these things that you can control, let's really lean into. Figure out what's important to you, set some goals around it. But I want to say set realistic and achievable goals. If you start to set a goal and it's too high and it's kind of out of reach of things, then it's going to actually contribute to more frustration and potentially more depression if you don't achieve it. So we want this to be something that feels really achievable, really within your realm of your grasp, and again, will serve a purpose in having it be something really important to you. Another thing I want to mention, not everyone addresses this side of it. We're looking at, oh, here's some things to do with your time. Let's also look at when things we don't want to do. Let's take some things off your plate if feasible. Setting healthy boundaries is like amazing self-care. It's one of the best coping strategies that you can do. And a lot of us don't have an innate skill in this. It's something that's learned, something people teach you often, and some of us haven't gotten that lesson. So it can be something that needs to get practiced. But the values exercise can help you figure out what it is you want to keep on your plate and what you want to put your time and energy into and what you don't. And those things we need to start putting some boundaries around so that you have the time and the energy to focus it toward the things that are important. So healthy boundaries, that's a whole other, it's a whole, I could do a whole talk on just that, but that's an important piece of it. I just want to make sure that you're keeping in mind that you don't have to just keep adding, adding, adding. That in itself, it's overwhelming. You might need to start subtracting some things so that you get a good balance and that your energy is being used efficiently and in the way that you would like it to be. So here's some things. I have a values worksheet I do with a lot of folks. I put a link to it in the resources page, and this is a chunk from it where it talks about different domains of things to consider when you're thinking about your values. What are different areas of your life, of sort of quality of life living experiences that you feel like you're doing a great job in attending to? What's important to you? Are you putting your time and energy into that thing? Is that the case? Are you like in line with what your values are right now? Or are there some areas where you're like, ooh, actually, this is really important to me. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm not giving it enough attention. And maybe you want to put more attention into that. Maybe take it away from a different area, for instance. So this is sort of something to consider. Just get your, wheels turning about like what areas are important, family, different kinds of relationships, spirituality, health, and physical well-being. Some people I've talked to will say, I've been so focused on my health, but very specifically my brain tumor diagnosis, that some of these other things have lapsed a little bit. Like I'm not just doing general care and well-being anymore because I've been so focused on these treatments. So then they kind of reassess and they sort of refocus their energy on, okay, I got to get back into exercising, eating well, the things that you guys have been learning in these other classes. but yeah, all these different sort of, I just wanted to give this as an example of like the types of things that you can sort of ask yourself for different questions. Like what sort of friendships, what are the qualities you want in your friendships? What would you like to build? Are there some that you would like to put more focus on? Are there others you want to put a boundary around because maybe they're not serving you in some way? Career, if you're focused in a career, what is the value around that career you have? Is it serving your value? Is it not? If you're not in a career anymore, is there something else that holds the value of, being productive and accomplishment and things that you could be putting your efforts toward, volunteering or other types of activities where you're going to feel like that's the same sense of purpose. Do you want to focus energy there, for instance? So this gives you kind of an idea. The other worksheet I have in the resources area has more of like values words that can kind of help narrow down like how you want to be seen or how you want to be perceived as living your life? Or do you feel like acceptance of other people is important? Is, equity around other people important? Is respect important? What is it that's important to you? Those kinds of things. I've got another worksheet that goes through those as well. It's just a much longer list I couldn't put in the PowerPoint, but there's a list that kind of helps prompt you to think about what are these things that are important to me? How do I want to live my life? And how do I want other people to be like, you know what? I can tell. I can tell that she thinks that equity is super important by the way she's living her life. How do you enact these things? Um, Other coping strategies I wanted to point out that are great go-tos, but that I didn't have enough time to go through in a lot of detail, but I wanted to make sure they were on the presentation, is gratitude practice. I'm always surprised how much this can make a difference for people. When you're in a more like that stressful state of threat, you're automatically going to start engaging negative thinking. And we have a phrase in neuropsych that's if it fires together, it wires together. So that means like if different, the nerves in your brain, if those neurons talk to each other and are networked together, if they keep talking, 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 and they fire together, then they're going to get, connected and they're going to fire frequently. Like those are the frequently used ones and they connect to other similar things. Our brain organizes stuff. It's very organized. It likes that. So if something's similar, it's going to connect to that and it's going to bring that up. So if you're in a stress state, which is inherently looking for threats, that's what your stress brain is doing. It's like, ooh, I got to look for all the danger everywhere. I am in threat mode. That's a negative thinking space to be in. So you're starting to look for negatives everywhere because your brain is in like negative mode. Understandably, it makes sense why it does this. But you want to be able to find ways to turn off all of those connections that have been made that are now kicking up all these negative thoughts. People will tell me it's a weird phenomenon. You could tell me if you've ever experienced this. Now you're in like worry zone about maybe your health, and then you start thinking about, oh, but now I'm worried about finances, and now I'm remembering I had, oh, I have student loan debt, and oh my gosh, I had that one embarrassing thing happen to me in high school, and remember when I did that presentation in sixth grade. Like there's this weird, our brains make connections like that, and if it has a negative emotion associated with it, those things will like they kind of cluster together, and there can be just overwhelm. So gratitude practice, the reason I bring this one up, it kind of hacks that system. So if you're in this state of like negative thinking, negative emotions coming up with it, if that's always on, if it's always firing, a way to turn it off and get you to turn on your positive thinking, to get the positive ones firing, is to do a gratitude practice. It might not feel genuine at first, depending. Some people might be just so genuinely grateful, and this might be an easy task. If you're having trouble with it and it doesn't feel genuine at first, start small. I'm grateful for plumbing. I'm really glad I have indoor plumbing right now. I had a warm shower today, whatever it is. I'm grateful I have electricity. Um, whatever it is, start small and name like three things a day. Write it down, possibly. You'd be surprised how much sort of like forcing that focus on positive things will start to activate the positive thinking, and then it'll start to feel more genuine. So this one can be a really helpful one for kind of turning the wheels a little bit on if you're feeling like you're in a really negative headspace. Um, Social support, similarly, if you feel like you are kind of in that negative space, having people around you to talk to connect with, to foster those positive feelings, the laughter and the joy of being around others can make a huge difference too. This can be, I think, harder, especially for folks will tell me, people don't quite understand what I'm going through, or they might not understand why being in a big crowd of people for me has gotten harder. Why I get so fatigued when I'm around my friends now, or that I can't go to big loud restaurants anymore because it's overwhelming. This one can be challenging. A lot of people have sort of that social concerns after their diagnosis. I work with a lot of people on this, but I think it's about figuring out ways to continue to foster these connections that sort of works within the place that you're at now. And it might be starting with the people you're closest to and telling them, here's what works best for me. Maybe instead of having a dinner out for my birthday, let's have like two people over to the house where I can control the sound, I can control things better, and I can, we can have these conversations in a little bit better environment for me to be able to participate for longer and to feel more joy. Um, so being able to figure out ways to continue with that social connection, not only is it helpful emotionally for us, but there's lots of studies now that show cognitively, if we don't have that social connection, we cognitively suffer. It's interesting. There's a lot more studies coming out for that now. We're social animals. We like to have those connections. So figuring out ways, if you don't have a lot of people around you right now, there's our support groups, Naomi and Mary. If you don't know about them already, I'm sure I'd be happy to tell you more about it. Um, so that's something to consider if you don't have that already going, figuring out ways to add that in. Behavioral activation is a tried and true. That's the go-to for any kind of depression, is to figure out ways to get re-engaged. Depression is that freeze response. So the stress response is fight or flight, is what you hear a lot. Like that's that I'm going to fight. I got to, defend myself. I'm going to fight. So your muscles tense up and you're getting ready to fight. Or the flight. I'm going to run. I'm getting out of here. You avoid this altogether. But freeze is another one that's coming up in popularity, and I think it speaks a lot to those depression symptoms people can feel. If you're in a freeze state, you want to hide. If there's something so overwhelming that it's becoming too much to deal with, you might want to just stay in bed all day. You might want to avoid people because they're becoming too much for you. If you're in that just kind of heightenedly overwhelmed, overtaxed state a lot, behavioral activation will be helpful, but it's going to be harder to do because you're in such a that green side of that curve. You're in that inactive state where we're going to have to get a little bit of momentum going to help get you up and get your get up and go a little bit more up and going, let's say. Um, so building that momentum again can be a little challenging, but it can be so helpful. The small things can really add up. So finding activities that feel worth it to you. So something fun. It's not like, maybe not the first step is like, I'm going to get up and do dishes today. That's not fun. No one wants to do that. Something fun. I'm going to go outside and see if I can find some wildflowers in my neighborhood today because it's that time of year and we should all be stoked. It's so fun. So something like that where there's fun or joy associated with it, maybe try to start with those, but something that feels achievable, not like I'm going to drive to Disneyland this weekend. What's something small? I'm going to go outside and see if I can find, someone walking their dog and see if I can find a cute dog today. Something that just gets you up and out, gets you active. That acting and creating more momentum step by step by step is really going to help get you in the place where things are going to feel more reasonable again. So behavioral activation is a good go-to. You might need some support around that if you're having some trouble with it, because you might need other people to help kind of pull you in, because it might be hard for you to build that momentum on your own. That's another one to consider, maybe working with a therapist on if you really want some extra support too. Self-care overall, some of the things we've been talking about in this whole series, all lovely types of self-care. This is one I feel like I find a lot of times, especially with parents, is not always prioritized. So I put it in every time. I want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself and your needs so that you're in the best place possible to deal with stress and to deal with these things that are coming at you. If you're not in a good place where you're not getting good sleep, you're not getting good nutrition, your body's not feeling good because it hasn't moved in a while, or you haven't, done anything for yourself and you're feeling almost resentful for that. If you're in a place where you're not taking care of yourself, everything feels harder. So making sure you prioritize some self-care and being able to give yourself that self-compassion around it's important for me to do in order to do the other things I need to do. And then prioritizing sleep. I'm not sure how much you guys already talked about sleep, but I was going to do a few sleep things because there's just such a strong link between sleep and mental health. I thought such a lovely example of that earlier with adding the nap in. If you're experiencing more mental fatigue or fatigue in general, especially during active treatment cycles, You really want to make sure you're getting that rest in. But that overall, a lot of people just tend to have a lingering fatigue with them. Not everyone. Some people might have that lingering fatigue over time that feels different than how they used to be. And energy management becomes a different thing than maybe it used to have to be. And so for it might be that even if you weren't prioritizing sleep before and you were doing fine, you might need to now because you really need that extra rest. Or you're going to end up overwhelming your system again and get into that stressed state. So even if there's not actual stressors coming at you, you're stressing yourself by not sleeping enough. It puts you in a state of imbalance and you're in that stressed out response state just by not sleeping enough. So getting enough sleep so that you're filling up your tank, that you've got enough fuel to do the things you want to do. And it's also just going to put you in a place where you're able to handle all the day-to-day stuff better because you're not already in a stress state. You're not already up here and then one more thing is going to like kick you over into a really like irritable state. You're down here and you're like, okay, I can deal with some stuff. I can let some things build if I need to. I'll throw a breathing exercise in. We'll get it back down again. So just it's such a correlation with mood and sleep. So things about sleep hygiene, in case you haven't gone over them yet, one thing that comes up a lot with my folks is they say here getting regular, it's structure. A lot of people I work with either aren't doing the same job they used to, or they're not doing it full time, or they're not working at all, or maybe they're in the active treatment phase and they don't have that same structure day to day anymore. I'll just say work creates a lot of structure. We don't realize it until it's not the same as it used to be. The 8 to 5 day created structure for us to work our lives around. And a lot of people I work with, that's not the same bookends aren't in place. So one thing is to get that structure back. If you don't have it, or even if you have it and you're just in a place where sleep hasn't been prioritized, same thing. But if you don't have the structure, creating some sort of structure will help a lot. Our brains love structure. They love it. It's their favorite thing. The more you can organize and create structure, the less stressed they have to be because they know what to expect. They don't have to like deal with ambiguity. They're like, ooh, I know what this is. I can do this. The more they have to figure it out, you're using more mental energy. It might put you in a more stressed state. You might fatigue faster. Structure can be really helpful in a lot of ways. I do this a lot with my cognition stuff too. But for sleep, having that structure helps. Get up at the same time, go to bed at the same time. This rhythm that you have, this like we call it like a social rhythm, that circadian rhythm that is sort of inherent biologically for us. It's kind of surprising how much that actually does make a difference. Like if we aren't that far away from like hunter-gatherer stage really, where we actually rose with the sun and then went to sleep when the sun went down. So getting a good rhythm and structure to your day can help in itself. It helps to sort of train your brain when it needs to shut down. And if it's not always the same time, then your brain doesn't know when it's supposed to sleep. So structure can help. Doing winding down activities before bedtime. Some people do like a warm bath or a warm shower that kind of calms you down, or maybe some stretching, maybe some reading, something that becomes kind of a routine where it sort of signals to your brain and your body that, oh, okay, we're about to sleep. I'm going to shut some things down. I'm going to get into a relaxed state to help kind of ease you into sleep. That one can be a really nice one if you haven't done that, adding that and seeing if it makes a difference, where you give yourself a little prep time before getting into bed. Limiting caffeine, alcohol, nicotine, any of those things can disrupt your sleep cycles. So especially caffeine, if you have caffeine, a lot of people I work with need the caffeine like in the morning, especially to help with like feeling more attentive because of the mental fatigue. That's great, but you might need to start to taper off a little bit toward the afternoon so that it doesn't impact your sleep later. Alcohol has this triggering effect in your liver at night where it'll wake you up in the middle of the night. Nicotine messes with stuff. So all those can mess with it in different ways. So if any of those are in your life already, you might try reducing them or removing them and seeing what happens. Minimize light and screen. This is another one that's becoming more popular in the research because we have so many screens now. This idea of blue light versus red light. You can go in a whole deep dive about this. But overall, what we're saying is let's limit our screen time in general. I think that we all could agree that that's probably a good idea, but especially right before bed. Having light or screens in your face, it's activating your circadian rhythms to make it think the sun is up. So it actually is like biologically confusing for our brains, and we don't think to shut down then because we're like, oh, I guess we're supposed to get up now. So we want to get into a relaxed, pretend we're going down with the sun kind of state, whatever that feels like for you in your room, making sure you're creating that environment. Usually, actually, too, we sleep better in a little bit cooler environment. I want to say I saw a study where like 68 degrees or something like that was good. Like you want to be in a cooler state because when you sleep, you actually create heat. Your body creates more heat and energy. So if you're in a hot space, oftentimes you overheat and that will wake you up. So there's like different things you can try to see if it's helpful. But I wanted to point out that the sleep hygiene piece, if you haven't tried something, if you're having trouble with sleep, and there's things on here that are ideas you haven't tried, there's options. There's a few things you can like take for a spin and see if it makes a big difference. Some people, little changes to their routine can make a big difference. And then if you're sleeping better, you're getting up feeling more refreshed, you're more ready to take on the day, your mood is in a better place to manage the things that you're dealing with all day too. So this can be an important piece if you haven't looked at this or addressed it. And if you're still having some trouble with it, talking to your medical doctors about that, they can either refer you to sleep specialists or give you some other ideas to try. They've got sleep is a thing for a lot of people. So we have other ideas. So if none of these are working for you, letting one of your providers know and we can try to continue to help you. This one too, the not lying in bed for too long, is this like a stimulus kind of thing where if you start to associate the bed with being awake, then you start to be awake in bed. So that's going off of that sort of behavioral strategy. So sometimes this does work for people. If you're in bed and you're awake and it's taking a while, get out of bed and go somewhere else, do a wind down routine, and then come back so that you only associate the bed with sleep. You're only doing sleep there. You don't do the screens, any of that. When you're awake, go somewhere else. Sleep is in the bed. Okay. So in summary, we're coming to the end. We're doing our wind down right now. Okay, so the summary. So it's common to experience distress after this diagnosis, can come in waves or fluctuations, especially it's a traumatic thing that happens. It can be a grief kind of process where it might come on all at once and then you might be doing okay. Being able to manage those feelings and thoughts and actions over time, I think is always a work in progress, but hopefully these tips will help you with that and figuring out what works best for you. Everyone's a little different. Um, if you do things like the deep breathing, some mindfulness, the grounding can help, especially in sort of getting you out of that immediate sort of distressed state, that stress response that comes on, and giving you a little chance to calm down, get that parasympathetic nervous system on board so you feel more relaxed and you're more able to cope with things. Shifting your focus from that negative space into a more positive space by maybe setting some goals around your values, increasing your social connection, increasing positive experiences, finding like little positive things that might bring you joy in your day. Again, you can start small. We don't want to overwhelm you more. We don't want to set goals that are going to create more stress. We want things that are small and achievable to help build your confidence around doing these things and get that momentum building again. Prioritizing sleep so that you can get into the best state possible to be able to manage any distress that comes at you or getting that overwhelmed feeling. You want to make sure that you have good fuel in your tank so that you are at your best to handle the day. And then also considering to talk with any of your care team about possible resources or if you want to get connected with a mental health provider, either within our system or outside, for other support, that's also an option. So that's something to consider as well. And I've included some resources here. If you haven't been to our supportive care services website, I also did a QR code down here just real quick just to that because I felt really fancy and figured that out. But there is the website here. If you look at, there's a lot of stuff under there. There's like this, for instance, there's, videos from this posted on there. There's videos about memory strategies. There's videos about, what about cannabis? What about the ketogenic diet? There's all sorts of stuff. So if you haven't done that, I mean, always probably already advertise these things, but if you haven't gone in there and done a deep dive, we have a cognitive strategies manual, for instance. We're working on an emotional wellness one. All sorts of stuff lies on that website. Like you might have to hit a few buttons to dig down a couple menus to find it. So I wanted to just give that a little plug. We've got some good stuff on there. Some of the apps that have some really good relaxation exercises or different ways that they explain how it helps and they show you an exercise and do a guided practice is Headspace or Calm. Some of these have gotten expensive. So if you don't necessarily want to do the full app, I have found some really lovely YouTube videos that Headspace has put out. Bless them for doing this. They have one on box breathing. These are all like 3-minute videos. They're very short. Box breathing will walk you through a breathing exercise. There's one on the belly breathing, the diaphragmatic breathing that'll walk you through an exercise. There's one on grounding. And there's one on like grounding and using the grounding to sort of let go of some thinking. So I just thought these are 4 of my favorites that they put together that are kind of in line with what we talked about today. So I included those links on here too if you want to try those. And those are free and accessible. And then I also put on those values worksheets that I mentioned. If you wanted to do some exploration around your values, what's important to you? What do you want to do to move things around so that you feel like you're living a life that's in line with your values if you feel like it's not. So, exploration around that and see if that's where you want to focus your time and focus your energy because that is up to you where you do that. Questions. I hope I left enough time for some question. Anybody have any questions they want to ask?